The noose was tight around her neck, its coarse fibers biting into her skin as the sun blazed over Dusty Hollow's dusty square. Clara Hensley, a 24-year-old seamstress with calloused hands and a heart heavy with grief, stood trembling on the rickety wooden platform. Her wrists were bound with rough hemp, and her face, streaked with dirt and tears, betrayed the terror of a woman facing death for a crime she hadn't committed. The crowd of about 50 townsfolk, shippers, farmers, and curious children peering from behind barrels watched in uneasy silence. Judge Amos Warwick, a man whose wealth and authority cast a long shadow over Dusty Hollow, read her sentence with a voice that echoed like a hammer on iron. In 10 minutes, Clara would be dead, her life snuffed out for allegedly stealing a sapphire brooch from the judge's wife, Eleanor Warwick. The accusation was a lie, but in this small Nevada town in 1878, the word of a poor orphan girl carried no weight against the powerful. Clara's crime, as Judge Warwick proclaimed, was the theft of a brooch valued at more than most in Dusty Hollow could earn in a decade. She'd been mending curtains in the Warwicks' opulent home when the brooch vanished. No one else had been in the room, or so Eleanor claimed. But Clara had seen something that night, something she hadn't dared speak aloud until it was too late. Through the parlor window, under the pale glow of a half-moon, she'd watched Eleanor slip the brooch into a velvet pouch and bury it beneath the rose bushes in the garden. It was a setup, plain and simple, but who would believe Clara? An orphan since age 10, she'd scratched out a living stitching dresses and repairing linens, sleeping in a cramped attic above the general store. The townsfolk pitied her, but pity wouldn't save her now. The judge's voice thundered on, detailing Clara's supposed guilt with theatrical flair. His silver mustache twitched as he spoke, and his eyes gleamed with a satisfaction that chilled Clara's blood. The crowd shifted, some averting their gaze, others leaning forward with grim fascination. Dusty Hollow hadn't seen a public execution in for years, and Warwick was ensuring it was a spectacle. The executioner, a weary man named Silas Boone, adjusted the trapdoor beneath Clara's feet. Its creak sent a jolt through her body, her knees nearly giving way. Her heart pounded, each beat a desperate plea for a miracle. She tried to pray, her lips moving silently, but fear choked the words. How could this be justice? She'd never stolen, never lied, never harmed a soul. Yet here she stood, condemned by a man who seemed to relish her suffering. Judge Warwick snapped his gold pocket watch shut, his gaze locking onto Clara's. For a fleeting moment, she saw something in his ice glee, perhaps, or something darker. He nodded to Silas, who reached for the lever that would drop the platform. The crowd held its breath. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Then, from the edge of the square, came a sound that froze everyone in place, the uneven clatter of boots and the jangle of spurs. A lone figure staggered up the platform steps, his movements unsteady but deliberate. The drunk cowboy who'd just stumbled into Dusty Hollow was about to turn this execution into a reckoning no one would forget. Elijah Eli Stone, reeking of cheap whiskey and sunburn from days on the trail, was a sight to behold. His battered gray hat sat askew, and his faded duster was caked with dust and sweat. To the crowd, he looked like a vagrant who'd wandered into the wrong town at the worst possible time. But Ellie's eyes, though red from drink, were sharp, scanning the scene with a clarity that belied his drunken sway. He noted the townsfolk's uneasy postures, the judge's hand resting on his polished revolver, and the raw fear on Clara's face. He'd seen enough hangings to know when something was rotten, and Dusty Hollow stank of it. Judge Warwick's face flushed with irritation as he turned to the interloper. "This is a court proceeding," he barked, his voice cutting through the square. "Move along, stranger, or I'll have you locked up for disrupting justice." Eli swayed, one hand gripping the platform railing, but his voice carried clear and loud, slurred though it was. "Justice? You call this justice?" He gestured wildly at Clara, nearly toppling over. "You're fixin' to hang a girl who looks like she couldn't steal a biscuit from a dog. What's her crime? Robbing the whole damn town?" The crowd stirred, a ripple of unease passing through them. A few exchanged glances, their doubts surfacing. Eli might be drunk, but his words echoed thoughts some had buried. Warwick's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on his gun. She stole my wife's sapphire brooch, he snapped. A valuable heirloom. The law as clear thieves hang. Eli let out a hoarse laugh, loud enough to startle a horse tethered nearby. Your wife, ain't that tidy? Judge, jury, and victim all under one roof. Real convenient. Clara stared at this stranger, her heart catching. No one had spoken for her during her sham of a trial at her court-appointed lawyer. Not a single neighbor. Yet here was this drunken drifter, challenging the most powerful man in Dusty Hollow. Warwick stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. Move along, or you'll swing beside her. But Eli didn't budge. Instead, he reached into his duster and pulled out something that made the crowd gasp. A tarnished badge. Its edges worn, but its inscription clear. Deputy U.S. Marshal. The square fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Warwick's confident sneer faltered, his hand trembling slightly on his gun. Eli tucked the badge away, his voice steady despite his sway. Now, Judge, you were saying something about the law being clear. Clara felt a flicker of hope, the first in days. A federal marshal, here now? Maybe fate hadn't abandoned her. But Warwick recovered quickly, his years of wielding unchecked power kicking in. Marshal or not, you've got no jurisdiction here, he said, his voice cold. This is a local matter, tried in my court under my law. Eli tilted his head, considering. Your law, huh? Tell me about this trial. How long'd it last? Who spoke for the girl? What evidence you got? The questions hung heavy, unanswered. Warwick's jaw worked, but no words came. The crowd murmured louder now. Martha Grayson, the town's baker, whispered to her husband, he's right. There wasn't much of a trial. Old Ben Carver, a retired prospector, scratched his beard, frowning. Warwick's patience snapped. She was caught red-handed, he growled. The brooch was gone, and she was the only one there. Ellie's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. Red-handed? You mean you found the brooch on her? In her pockets? Her room? Warwick hesitated, just long enough for the crowd to notice. Well, no, but nothing. Eli took a step closer, his drunken sway giving way to a predator's grace. You're telling me you're hanging this girl 'cause a brooch went missing while she was in your house? That's your evidence? The crowd's murmurs grew into a low roar. Martha Grayson stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. I saw Clara that night, Judge. She came to my shop after work, scared out of her wits. Said she'd seen something odd at your house, but wouldn't say what. Ben Carver nodded. She told me something similar. Said she was afraid to speak up. Even Sheriff Luke Hargrove, who'd stood silent by the platform, shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing his holster. Warwick's authority, ironclad for years, was cracking before their eyes. You're out of line, Marshal. Warwick spat, his face red. This girl is guilty, and she'll hang. But Eli was already reaching into his saddlebag, his movements slow and deliberate. What he pulled out made Warwick stumble back, his eyes wide with shock. The sapphire brooch gleamed in the sunlight, its intricate silver setting unmistakable. Eli held it high, letting every soul in the square see it. Found this buried under your rose bushes, Judge, he said, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. Strange place for a stolen brooch, ain't it? Warwick's face drained of color. That's impossible. You're lying. Ellie's eyes, bloodshot but steady, locked onto the judge. Am I? Your wife told the whole town this brooch was stolen from her jewelry box while Miss Hensley was working. Yet here it is, buried in your garden, wrapped in this. He held up a scrap of lace, delicate and expensive, unmistakably from one of Eleanor Warwick's dresses. The crowd gasped. Several women recognized the lace immediately. It was from Eleanor's favorite gown. Clara's legs buckled, relief flooding her. She'd been right. She'd seen Eleanor bury something that night, but her lawyer, a spineless man named Virgil Tate, had dismissed her claims as desperate lies. Now the truth was out, and the crowd was turning. Ben Carver stepped forward, his voice rough with anger. Judge, what's this mean? Why's your wife's brooch in your garden? Warwick's voice rose, desperate. This man's in league with the girl. He planted that evidence to save her. Eli laughed, the sound bitter. In league. Judge, I rode into this town half an hour ago. Never laid eyes on this girl before. But I've seen plenty of crooked officials, and you're smelling worse by the minute. Sheriff Hargrove finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Judge, if that brooch was in your garden, we got questions need answerin'." Warwick's eyes darted, his composure crumbling. "It wasn't in my garden. This drunk's lying." But Martha Grayson wasn't having it. "Clara told me she saw Eleanor actin' strange that night. I should have listened." The crowd pressed closer, their murmurs turning to shouts. Warwick's control was slipping, and he knew it. Years of ruling Dusty Hollow with an iron fist were unraveling in minutes. Eli climbed the platform steps, his drunken act fading to reveal a man in full control. He reached for the ropes binding Clara's wrists, ignoring Warwick's protests. "Step away from the prisoner." Warwick drew his revolver, aiming it at Ellie's chest. The square fell silent, every eye on the two men. Clara's breath caught, fear and hope warring within her. Ellie's hand hovered near his own gun, his eyes locked on Warwick's trigger finger. Then, from the edge of the square, a woman's voice shattered the tension. "Amos, stop. She knows about Clara's letters." Eleanor Warwick was running toward the platform, her silk dress stained with dirt, her face streaked with tears. The crowd parted as Eleanor stumbled forward, gasping. "Amos, she saw Clara's letters." Warwick's gun wavered, his face crumpling. "Eleanor, get back to the house." But she kept coming, her voice breaking. "Clara, the girl you named our daughter after. She's alive, Amos, and this girl knows it." The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Warwick's daughter, Clara, was supposed to be dead, a tragedy he'd used to garner sympathy for years. Clara Hensley spoke, her voice shaky but clear. "I saw letters in your parlor, Mrs. Warwick. Letters from a girl named Clara, signed your daughter. You saw me reading them and panicked." Eleanor collapsed onto the platform steps, sobbing. "She's alive, in St. Louis. Amos told everyone she died, but she ran away years ago. I framed this girl to keep her quiet." Warwick's gun dropped to his side, his empire of lies collapsing. Sheriff Hargrove stepped forward, taking the revolver from his unresisting hand. Eli cut Clara's bonds, and she fell to her knees, free at last. "How'd you know to check the garden?" she whispered. Eli helped her up, his voice low. "Saw your missus watchin' from the window, lookin' guilty as sin. Took a chance." The crowd dispersed, buzzing with anger and disbelief. Dusty Hollow's reckoning had just begun. But the truth about Amos Warwick was far darker than anyone imagined. As the sun dipped low over Dusty Hollow, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, the town square stood eerily quiet, the hanging platform a stark reminder of the morning's near tragedy. Clara Hensley sat on the porch of Grayson's bakery, her hands still trembling from the noose that had been around her neck only hours before. The sapphire brooch, now in Sheriff Luke Hargrove's possession, gleamed accusingly in the fading light, a symbol of the lies that had nearly cost Clara her life. Elijah Eli Stone, the deputy U.S. Marshal who'd stumbled into town and upended Judge Amos Warwick's corrupt reign, leaned against a post, his weathered hat tilted back. His drunken act had faded, revealing a man hardened by years of chasing justice across the frontier. But the revelations about Warwick's daughter and the buried brooch were only the beginning. Dusty Hollow was about to learn that its judge's sins ran far deeper than a single frame-up. The crowd had dispersed, but the air buzzed with whispered questions. Townsfolk gathered in small knots outside the saloon, the general store, and the church, their voices low with disbelief. Martha Grayson, the baker who'd spoken up for Clara, was inside her shop, serving coffee to a shaken Clara. "You're safe now, dear," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "That man won't hurt you again." Clara nodded, but her eyes were distant, haunted by the weight of what she'd endured. "It's not just me," she whispered. "How many others did he hurt? How many didn't get a marshal to save them?" Her question hung heavy, echoing the unease that gripped Dusty Hollow. The town they'd trusted, the justice they'd believed in, had been a facade built on Amos Warwick's lies. Across town, in the small jailhouse, Sheriff Hargrove and Eli stood over Amos and Eleanor Warwick, now locked in separate cells. Amos sat slumped on a cot, his silver mustache drooping, his once imposing presence reduced to a defeated shell. Eleanor, still in her dirt-stained silk dress, clutched the bars, her eyes red from crying. "I told you everything," she said to Eli, her voice breaking. I helped him hide Clara, but I never wanted anyone to die. Ellie's jaw tightened. You framed an innocent girl to save your own skin, ma'am. That's as good as murder in my book. Hargrove, a man of few words, but steady resolve, scribbled notes, his face grim. We need to search their house, he said. If that brooch was buried, there's likely more they're hiding. Eli nodded, his mind racing. He'd tracked Amos Warwick, or rather, Jacob Holt, the name Warwick had used before fleeing Missouri for 2 years. The man had been a county clerk in St. Louis, skimming funds from land deals, until he vanished with $40,000 in public money. Eli had followed his trail across 3 territories, piecing together a pattern of corruption that always ended with innocent people suffering. Clara Hensley's near execution was just the latest in a long line of injustices. But something told Eli that Dusty Hollow held secrets even he hadn't anticipated. Let's go, he said to Hargrove. Whatever's in that house, we need to find it before they cover their tracks. The Warwick residence, a 2-story mansion that loomed over Dusty Hollow's modest homes, was a monument to Amos's ill-gotten wealth. Its polished oak doors and stained glass windows stood in stark contrast to the weathered shacks of the townsfolk. Eli and Hargrove stepped inside, their boots echoing on the hardwood floor. The parlor where Clara had worked was pristine, with velvet curtains and a mahogany desk. But Ellie's eyes went to the garden visible through the window, where the rose bushes hid their secrets. Start with the desk, he told Hargrove. I'll check upstairs. The sheriff nodded, already rifling through drawers, while Eli climbed the creaking staircase, his hand on his revolver. Upstairs, in the Warwick's bedroom, Eli found a locked trunk beneath the bed. He pried it open with a crowbar from his saddlebag, revealing a trove of documents, ledgers, letters, and maps, all meticulously organized. His heart sank as he skimmed the pages. The ledgers detailed bribes paid to local officials, forged deeds transferring land from poor farmers to wealthy speculators, and payments to outlaws for rustled cattle. One name kept appearing: Jacob Holt. Amos Warwick hadn't just stolen money in Missouri. He'd built a criminal empire here in Dusty Hollow, using his position as judge to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. Ellie's blood ran cold as he found a leather-bound journal tucked beneath the ledgers. Its pages were filled with Amos's neat handwriting, chronicling years of corruption. Entries described trials where innocent men and women were convicted on flimsy evidence, their properties seized and sold to line Amos's pockets. One entry, dated 2 years prior, made Ellie's stomach churn. The Miller family accused of arson after refusing to sell their land. Convicted and hanged. Land sold to J. Carver for $2,000. Eli remembered the Miller case from his travels. The fire had been ruled accidental by a territorial investigator, but Amos's court had ignored the findings. How many others had suffered like this? Downstairs, Hargrove's shout broke Ellie's focus. Stone, get down here. The sheriff stood in the parlor, holding a stack of letters tied with twine. These are from Clara Warwick, daughter, he said, his voice tight. She's alive, all right, living in St. Louis under a new name. But look at this. He handed Eli a letter dated 6 months ago, written in a young woman's careful script. Father, I know what you've done. It read, I saw the ledgers before I left. If you don't stop, I'll tell the authorities everything. Ellie's eyes narrowed. That's why they framed Clara Hensley. She saw these letters, and they needed her gone before she connected the dots. The 2 men exchanged a glance, the weight of their discovery settling in. Amos Warwick hadn't just framed Clara to protect his wife's theft. He was covering up a lifetime of crimes, with his daughter's letters as the final threat to his empire. Hargrove's face hardened. We need to bring this to the town. They deserve to know. Eli nodded but hesitated. Not yet. If we show this now, the town will riot. We need to build something airtight. And we need to find out how deep this goes. Hargrove frowned, but agreed. What about the Warwicks? They'll try to weasel out of this. Ellie's smile was grim. Let him try. They're not going anywhere. Back at the jail, Amos Warwick was pacing his cell, his earlier defeat giving way to a desperate cunning. You've got nothing on me, Marshal, he called as Eli and Hargrove returned. A brooch in my garden? That's no proof. Eli tossed the journal onto the sheriff's desk. its pages open to the Miller case. How about this, Jacob Holt? Or do you prefer Amos Warwick? Amos's face went ashen, but he recovered quickly. Lies. Fabrications. You planted that, just like the brooch. Eleanor, in the next cell, sobbed quietly. Amos, stop. It's over. But Amos ignored her, his eyes blazing with defiance. I'm the law here, Marshal. You're just a drunk with a badge. Eli leaned close to the bars, his voice low. You're no lawman, Holt. You're a thief and a murderer, and I've got enough in that trunk to see you hang 10 times over. Amos's bravado faltered, but he clung to his denial. You'll never prove it. This town needs me. Eli turned away, addressing Hargrove. Keep em locked up tight. I'm sending a telegraph to the territorial capital. We need a prosecutor and federal troops to keep this from turning into a bloodbath. Hargrove nodded, his hand resting on his gun. What about Clara Hensley? She's still shaken. Ellie's expression softened. I'll check on her. She's been through hell, but she's tougher than she looks. At Grayson's bakery, Clara was sipping coffee, her hands steadier now. Martha and her husband, Henry, sat with her, their faces etched with guilt. We should have spoken up sooner, Henry said, his voice rough. We knew something wasn't right with that trial. Clara shook her head. You spoke up when it mattered. That's more than most did. Her eyes drifted to the square, where the hanging platform still stood. I keep seeing that noose, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes. Martha squeezed her hand. You're free now, Clara, and we'll make sure this town does right by you. Eli stepped onto the porch, his hat in hand. Miss Hensley, how you holdin' up? Clara managed a small smile. Better, thanks to you. But I can't stop thinking about the others people who didn't get saved. Eli nodded, his face heavy with the same thought. We found more in Warwick's house. Ledgers, letters, proof he's been ruining lives for years. The Miller family, the Thompsons, others. We're gonna make it right. Clara's eyes widened. The Millers? I remember them. They were kind to me when I was a kid. Warwick said they burned their own barn. Ellie's jaw clenched. He lied. They were hanged to steal their land. The revelation hit Clara like a blow. She'd always known Dusty Hollow had its share of injustice, but the scale of Warwick's crimes was staggering. What happens now? She asked. Eli sat beside her, his voice steady. We're building a case. The territorial governor's sending a prosecutor to review every trial Warwick handled. It'll take time, but we'll get justice for everyone he wronged. Clara nodded, but her eyes were fierce. I want to help. I saw those letters. I know what he's done. I want to make sure he pays. Eli studied her, impressed by her resolve. You've got grit, Miss Hensley. We'll need it. That night, Dusty Hollow's saloon was packed, the air thick with tension. Word of Warwick's crimes had spread, and the townsfolk were divided. Some, like Ben Carver, demanded Amos and Eleanor face the gallows. Others, like saloon owner Nate Pritchard, worried about the town's future. If Warwick's trials were fake, half our land deeds are worthless, Nate said, slamming a glass on the bar. We'll be fighting over property lines for years. Ben snorted. Better that than letting a murderer run our town. The argument grew heated, fists clenching, until Martha Grayson stood on a chair, her voice cutting through the din. Enough. We've all been fooled, but our Gween won't fix it. We need to stand together, or Warwick's won. Her words calmed the room, but the tension lingered. Outside, Eli stood in the shadows, listening. He knew towns like Dusty Hollow could tear themselves apart when trust was broken. He'd seen it before, good people turning on each other when the truth was too ugly to face. But Clara's words echoed in his mind. How many others didn't get saved? He'd spent 2 years chasing Jacob Holt, and every life lost to the man's greed weighed on him. Dusty Hollow was his chance to make things right, but the fight was far from over. The next morning, a rider arrived from the territorial capital, carrying a telegraph for Eli. The governor was sending a prosecutor, but there was a catch. Amos Warwick had powerful friends, men who'd profited from his schemes. If Eli couldn't build an airtight case, Warwick might walk free. Worse, the rider brought rumors of outlawsmen tied to Warwick's cattle-rustling ring gathering outside town. Hargrove met Eli at the jail, his face grim. We've got trouble. Some of Warwick's men are camping near the canyon. They might try to break him out. Ellie's hand went to his gun. Then we'd better be ready. Get every able-bodied man armed and posted. This town's seen enough blood." As the sun rose higher, Eli and Hargrove rallied the townsfolk. Ben Carver, Henry Grayson, and Nate Pritchard volunteered to stand guard, their faces set with determination. Clara, too, insisted on helping, despite Martha's protests. "I'm not sitting by while Warwick's men threaten this town," she said, her voice firm. Eli handed her a rifle, his eyes meeting hers. "You sure about this?" Clara nodded. "I've been helpless long enough." The town prepared for a siege. But the real battle was unfolding in the jail, where Amos Warwick was plotting his final move. In his cell, Amos whispered to a deputy who'd always been loyal to him, a young man named Caleb Voss. "Get word to my men," Amos hissed. "Tell them to hit the jail tonight. I'll make it worth their while." Caleb hesitated, his loyalty wavering. He'd seen the ledgers, heard Eleanor's confession. But Amos's promises of gold were tempting. "What about the marshal?" Caleb asked. Amos's smile was cold. "Stone's one man. My boys'll handle him." Unbeknownst to Amos, Caleb was having second thoughts, his conscience gnawing at him. He slipped out of the jail, not to deliver the message, but to find Eli. Caleb found the marshal at the town's edge, checking the defenses. "Marshal, I need to talk," he said, his voice low. Eli studied him, sensing the young man's conflict. "Spit it out, son." Caleb took a deep breath. "Warwick's planning a breakout. His men are combing tonight." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "And you're telling me this why?" Caleb looked away, ashamed. "I was loyal to him once, but I saw what he did to Clara, to the Millers. I can't be part of that no more." Eli clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did right, kid. Now help us stop him." As night fell, Dusty Hollow braced for the fight. Eli, Hargrove, and a dozen armed townsfolk took positions around the jail, their eyes scanning the darkness. Clara stood beside Martha, her rifle steady despite her racing heart. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Then, from the canyon, came the sound of hooves. Warwick's outlaws were coming. The battle that followed would test Dusty Hollow's resolve and reveal the true cost of Amos Warwick's empire. Would the town stand united, or would fear and greed tear it apart? The answer lay in the shadows, where Eli Stone waited, his hand on his gun, ready to face whatever came. The moon hung low over Dusty Hollow, casting long shadows across the dusty streets as the town braced for the fight of its life. The jailhouse, a squat building of weathered wood, stood at the heart of the defense, its iron-barred windows glowing faintly from the lanterns inside. Elijah Eli Stone, the deputy U.S. Marshal who'd upended Amos Warwick's corrupt empire, crouched behind a barrel, his revolver steady in his hand. Sheriff Luke Hargrove, grim-faced and resolute, positioned men along the perimeter. Ben Carver at the saloon, Henry Grayson near the bakery, Nate Pritchard by the general store, Clara Hensley, the young seamstress who'd narrowly escaped the gallows, gripped a rifle beside Martha Grayson, her eyes scanning the darkness. The hoof-beats from the canyon grew louder, signaling the approach of Warwick's outlaws. Men paid in blood and gold to free their master. Dusty Hollow's reckoning was at hand, and the choices made tonight would determine whether justice or chaos would prevail. Inside the jail, Amos Warwick paced his cell, his silver mustache twitching with nervous energy. Eleanor, in the adjacent cell, sat silently, her head bowed, the weight of her confessions crushing her. The ledgers and letters found in their mansion had exposed Amoson's Jacob Holt, a Missouri clerk turned criminal mastermind, as a man who'd stolen lives as easily as he'd stolen money. The sapphire brooch, buried to frame Clara, was just one piece of a vast web of corruption, forged deeds, rigged trials, and innocent families destroyed to feed Amos's greed. But now, with his men riding to break him out, Amos clung to the hope of escape. "They're coming," he muttered, gripping the bars. "You'll see, Marshal. This town's mine." Eli, checking his ammunition, didn't bother looking up. "Keep dreamin', Holt. Your empire's dust." The first shots rang out at midnight, shattering the tense silence. A dozen outlaws, their faces masked by bandanas, charged into Dusty Hollow, their horses kicking up clouds of dirt. Bullets splintered wood and shattered windows as the townsfolk returned fire. Ellie's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your ground. Aim for the riders. Ben Carver, his old prospector's hands steady, took down an outlaw with a single shot from the saloon roof. Henry Grayson, protecting his bakery, fired into the darkness, his heart pounding, but his aim true. Clara, stationed behind a wagon, surprised herself with her resolve, squeezing the trigger and clipping an outlaw's shoulder. The town, once divided by fear, was fighting as one, united against the men who'd profited from Warwick's lies. The battle raged for an hour, a brutal dance of gunfire and shouts. Nate Pritchard, the saloon owner, took a bullet to the arm but kept firing, his face set with defiance. Sheriff Hargrove moved like a man possessed, coordinating the defense while dodging a hail of lead. Eli, at the center of it all, was a force of nature, his revolver barking as he dropped two outlaws in quick succession. But the attackers were relentless, their numbers bolstered by mercenaries Amos had paid with stolen gold. As the jailhouse door shuttered under a battering ram, Eli knew they were running out of time. "Hargrove, get to the back," he shouted. "They're trying to breach." The sheriff nodded, rallying 3 men to reinforce the rear. Inside the jail, Amos's confidence faltered as the gunfire grew closer. "They'll get me out," he insisted, but his voice cracked. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes hollow. "It's over, Amos. You've brought this on us." Before he could respond, the jailhouse door splintered, and 2 outlaws burst in, their guns drawn. But they hadn't counted on Caleb Voss, the young deputy who'd betrayed Amos's plan to Eli. Caleb, stationed inside, fired from the shadows, dropping 1 outlaw instantly. The second lunged for Amos's cell, fumbling with keys, but Caleb tackled him, pinning him to the floor. "You're done," Caleb growled, binding the man's wrists. Amos's face twisted with rage. "Traitor, I made you." Caleb didn't flinch. "You made me ashamed." Outside, the tide was turning. The townsfolk's determination outmatched the outlaws' greed, and one by one, the attackers fell or fled. Eli took a grazing shot to the shoulder but ignored the pain. His focus locked on the last of the riders. Clara, her rifle empty, grabbed a fallen outlaw's pistol and fired, her shot scattering the final horses. As the dust settled, the surviving outlaws surrendered, their hands raised under the glare of Hargrove's lantern. The battle was over, but the cost was heavy. 2 townsfolk wounded. One dead, a young farmer named Tom Wiley, who'd left a wife and child. The victory was bittersweet, and the town's relief was tempered by grief. With the jail secure, Eli and Hargrove dragged the captured outlaws inside, chaining them alongside Amos and Eleanor. The ledgers, letters, and journal from the Warwick mansion were now under lock and key, evidence that would bury Amos for good. But one final revelation awaited. Among the captured outlaws was a man named Silas Reed, a cattle rustler who'd worked for Amos for years. Desperate to save himself, Silas spilled everything. "Holt didn't just frame folks," he said, his voice hoarse. "He ran a network outlaws, land speculators, even a crooked banker in Carson City. They've been stealing from towns like this for a decade." He handed Eli a crumpled map, marked with locations across Nevada and California where Amos's schemes had taken root. "There's more evidence buried at those spots," Silas added. "Deeds, gold, even bodies." Ellie's blood ran cold. The map was a death sentence for Amos's empire, but it also meant Dusty Hollow was just one piece of a larger puzzle. He turned to Hargrove. "We need to send this to the territorial capital. This ain't just about our town anymore." Hargrove nodded, his face weary but determined. "I'll write at dawn. The governor needs to know." Clara, who joined them at the jail, overheard Silas's confession. Her eyes blazed with anger. "He didn't just steal money," she said. "He stole families, lives. The Millers, the Thompson show, many more." Eli met her gaze. "We'll find out, Miss Hensley, and we'll make it right." The next morning, as the territorial prosecutor arrived with a small escort of federal troops, Dusty Hollow began to heal. The prosecutor, a stern man named Edward Klein, reviewed the evidence with a growing sense of horror. "This is the worst case of corruption I've seen in 20 years, he said, flipping through Amos's journal. "We'll need a commission to review every trial he handled. Families like the Millers deserve justice." Klein promised to exhume records and contact survivors, ensuring restitution for those wrongfully convicted. Amos, faced with the overwhelming evidence and Silas's testimony, broke down in his cell, confessing to everything: the bribes, the murders, the forged deeds. Eleanor, already cooperative, provided names of Amos's associates, sealing his fate. Clara stood outside the jail, watching as Amos and Eleanor were loaded into a prison wagon bound for the territorial capital. The townsfolk gathered, their faces a mix of relief and anger. Martha Grayson put an arm around Clara. "You're free now, truly," she said. Clara nodded, but her heart was heavy. "I'm free, but Tom Wiley's gone. And all those others Warwick hurt they don't get to come back." Eli, his shoulder bandaged, approached. "You're right, Miss Hensley. We can't undo the past, but we can make sure it don't happen again." He handed her a letter from the prosecutor, offering her a small sum from Amos's seized assets as compensation. "It ain't enough," Eli said, "but it's a start." Clara decided to leave Dusty Hollow, the memories of the noose to rot stay. She chose Sacramento, a bustling city where she could start anew as a seamstress. "I want to build something good," she told Martha. "Something that helps others like me." The Graysons, Ben Carver, and Nate Pritchard saw her off at the stagecoach, their gratitude evident. "You gave us back our town," Ben said, his voice rough. Clara smiled faintly. "You stood up for me. That's what saved us all." Eli stayed in Dusty Hollow for a year, working with Klein to unravel Amos's network. The map Silas provided led to hidden caches of gold and documents, exposing a dozen accomplices who faced trial. Amos was sentenced to life in federal prison, his dreams of power reduced to a cold cell. Eleanor received a reduced sentence for her cooperation, serving 5 years before disappearing into obscurity. Sheriff Hargrove was appointed interim judge, his honesty restoring faith in the town's justice system. The hanging platform was dismantled. It would use to build a schoolhouse, a symbol of hope over vengeance. 2 years later, Clara opened a seamstress shop in Sacramento, where she trained young women from poor backgrounds, giving them skills and a chance at a better life. She never forgot Eli Stone, the marshal who'd risked everything to save her. Eli, now a territorial marshal, continued his fight against corruption, carrying the weight of Dusty Hollow's lessons with him. The town itself thrived under new leadership, its people vigilant against the kind of tyranny Amos had wielded. As the sun set over Dusty Hollow's new schoolhouse, the scars of the past remained, but so did the strength of those who'd fought for truth. The town had faced its demons and emerged stronger, a testament to the power of courage and unity. What would you have done in Ellie's place? Would you have risked everything to confront a corrupt judge, knowing it could spark a violent showdown? Or would you have played it safe, letting the law take its course, even if it meant more injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. How should we stand against corruption and violence in our own lives? Your perspective matters. Let's start a conversation about justice and the cost of doing what's right.